Okay, it is 1 o'clock. So good afternoon. And thank you for joining us today for the Non-Metallic Mine Reclamation Plans, Part 1 overview. And this is Penny Pohle, and I am the Conservation Training and Membership Services Manager at Wisconsin Land and Water. And today, our presenter is going to be Roberta Walls. And Roberta has worked with the DNR for 12 years in various capacities, from wastewater and stormwater permitting, stream biology, industrial sand sector specialist, and most recently as the non-metallic mining coordinator. And as a coordinator, she works with each of the agency's programs to address jurisdictional and policy needs at non-metallic mines. Roberta also provides DNR oversight to reclamation regulatory authorities through NR 135 performance audits, technical support, and guidance. So we're pleased to have her lead our presentation today. And we may have a couple others, Dane Christensen from Polk County Land and Water Resources Department and Paul Cook from the Burnett County Land and Water Resources Department. They've been helping with this webinar series, so they may be interjecting a few times with their information, but mainly it's going to be Roberta. And I think that's about it. And I think, Roberta, are you ready to go?
I am set.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Let's
you.
go.
All right. So I really want to extend a great big thank you to Penny at Land and Water, to Paul Cook at Burnett County, and Dane Christensen at Polk County in helping pull this together. This will be a great resource for folks to utilize now and in the future. This is the first of a three-part webinar series. Our first part is going to go through an overview of the reclamation program and start to do a dive into non-metallic mining reclamation plans. And then the next two webinars are going to take a look at a bit of a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of the reclamation plan itself, and then to give an idea of what it looks like when it plays out in the field. So today, if I can get my presentation to cooperate with me. There we go. Our overview is going to cover a little bit of the reclamation program itself. We're going to take a cruise over the reclamation standards, and then to dive into what each of the plan components should include, along with a little bit of a visual of an example plan, just to kind of whet your appetite, get the new folks up to speed, and to get our seasoned professionals kind of all together in one opportunity to be able to really get ready for that deeper dive. I will give you a chance to ask questions after our overview and after our standards sections, and then again at the end. I think it's fair to start out with a conversation about what is non-metallic mining. There seems to be quite a bit of interpretations all across the state, but when it comes to reclamation, this is our go-to definition from NR 135. There's two main components for that. The first being the general operations to extract from the earth of mineral aggregates for use by the operator. That can include things like your drilling operations, your blasting, excavating, and dredging. It does not include any incidentals from other activities such as commercial sod and agricultural operations, forest products, and ornamental and gardening plants. Those types of minerals are generally very small amounts and are incidental to those activities. But we're taking a look at the operations mainly from the broad extraction of minerals from the earth. The other component to the non-metallic mining definition in the code is those processes that relate to the preparation of those extracted minerals for use outside of the mine area. That, talks to the blending of materials, grading, crushing, screening, scalping, and dewatering. The code also recognizes stockpiling as part of those processes involved in non-metallic mining. So what does that look like? Well, I think this is probably the main picture everybody has in their mind when they think of a non-metallic mine. This is a limestone quarry, nice high wall face that had been recently excavated. And you can see that they have probably brought in equipment to crush that limestone material to create the various grades of sand and gravel pit piles that you see in the pit there. This is also a non-metallic mine. This is a dredging operation, and in this particular instance is a mechanical dredge operation where a excavator with a dredge unit attached pulls material from below the groundwater table and runs it through the screens and sets the material up by size for the operations. You can also have hydraulic dredging operations in a non-metallic mining setting as well. This is an example of what I would consider not to be a non-metallic mine. You have stockpiling of material, and there would be crushing of the mineral that you see present for recycling of road materials, asphalt, and concrete. This one does not qualify as a non-metallic mine simply because there is no excavation of mineral from the earth at this location. It's only taking in material for the crushing and reuse of that material. So that this qualifies as a fill site rather than a mine. So then when we take a look at the site qualifying potentially as a non-metallic mine, we have to take a look at whether or not exemptions exist for that activity. When you take a look at NR 135, you'll see there's a grand total of 12 exemptions listed. They can be broadly categorized into various activities involving DOT projects and Chapter 30 based regulations as well as construction sites. The reason why they have those exemptions for those activities has to do with the fact that they are regulated under different criteria. So the DOT projects would fall under highway projects. Chapter 30 would have reclamation covered under its NR 340 permit with the state, construction sites covered under stormwater, things of that nature. So you will have restoration of the site. And so we don't need to have a reclamation permit on these sites because they're going to be enveloped in those projects. There's exemptions for farm uses, and I think it's important to indicate that it's exclusive use. So a farmer who pulls gravel or sand for use in his farming activities can meet that exemption, but if he sells or distributes that material to others in the area, then that is no longer being exclusively used by that individual on his property. So then that exemption would not apply. The less than 1 acre exemption that is listed in NR 135 also has a bit of criteria that needs to be met, and that is associated with the overall life of the mine. So even though they may only have 1 acre or less than 1 acre currently being excavated, if there is intentions by that operator to extract more than 1 acre's worth of mineral from that site, then it would likely not meet that exemption. So have a look at those exemptions. There's quite a few of them. If you have questions, you can always get a hold of me to ask more specifics, but you do need to kind of have that conversation with the operator about what the purpose of that mineral is to determine if that exemption applies. So following all of that, anything else requires a permit, and that includes your commercial entities as well as your public entities. So if the state is engaged in non-metallic mining, or the county highway departments have their own pits, they will require a permit just like the commercial entities will. A reclamation plan will need to be developed. and annual fees will have to be paid by both entities as well. The difference between the commercial folks and the public folks is that our commercial operators are going to have financial assurance on the site in order to operate. All right, moving along. Who's implementing the reclamation program for the state? Well, our counties are required by the statute to implement a reclamation program and issue permits and administer the compliance. So that happens at a couple of different areas that we see around the state, either through the zoning department or land conservation departments. We see them split pretty evenly across the state, but we also do see the occurrence where a zoning department and a land conservation department will jointly administer the program at the county level. The department encourages strong communication between the two departments so that there's clear understanding over who's conducting what at what time with regards to the administration of that program. Additionally to the counties, our local municipalities may adopt an ordinance and administer a reclamation program within their jurisdictions. So overall around the state we have 71 counties that administer the nonmetallic mining program, and within those counties we have 28 municipalities that also administer a reclamation program. Most of the counties know who those folks are, but if there's always a question, getting a hold of me can help answer whether or not a local municipality is a regulatory authority in that county. So DNR's role in the whole program is to help assure uniform implementation of that program statewide. We do this through a number of means. We do this through audits and ordinance reviews of each of the regulatory authorities that implement the programs. We also offer technical support to our regulatory authorities in interpreting the code and its appropriate application at the sites. And we also provide legal interpretation and mediation for any disputes that arise between our regulatory authorities and our operators. So now, beginning to switch into this reclamation plan development, one might begin to ask who does them, who develops those. Well, obviously, if we've got a commercial entity, the operator is responsible for developing his reclamation plan and submitting that to the regulatory authority who reviews it. So on occasion, you may find that a county highway department will have its own pit that they would have to have brought under a permit. So there you will want to have the highway department of the county develop that reclamation plan in conjunction with the county administrator, because of the potential for end land uses and land ownership can be a good partnership to develop with regards to that plan development. All right, so the regulatory authority role then seeks to ensure that the reclamation plan that is developed meets the standards and contains all of the components of the reclamation plan. And so there's an often a collaboration that works between the regulatory authority and the operator to ensure all of the required elements are present. So in talking about the standards now, so NR 135 has a very complete listing of standards for everyone to consider in the reclamation plans. I like to say there's about 14 of them there. If you take a look at NR 135, you'll see 10 listings under the headings. But the general standard that is first up contains roughly 5 of those standards. So when you add them all up, there's about 14 of them altogether. The solid waste standard is there to help clarify what is considered a waste material that is allowed on the site versus what is not allowed. Pretty much whatever falls under the definition of non-metallic mining refuse is allowed to be utilized back in reclamation. Those are things like your overburden materials and any materials that are separated from the end product that is not marketable and is expected to be retained on site and go back into reclamation. Things that would not be allowed would be any materials that are brought into the facility for use in the non-metallic mining operations, such as containers for hydraulic fluids or equipment pieces and parts, screens and things like that. And of course, a lot of times folks will note that non-metallic mining facilities tend to be convenient locations for passers to drop unexpected and unwarranted materials. So this standard helps us clarify what's allowed and what's not. The area disturbed and contemporaneous reclamation standard gets to the heart of what the reclamation program is here for. It is there to minimize the areas disturbed and to encourage reclamation to be done on a continuous basis while other mining takes place to help minimize what needs to be done in the end. Public health and safety is also included under the general standards. Also a interest of the legislature when developing the reclamation program, such that when mining is done, this land needs to be available and usable after mining is complete, and that includes the health and safety of the public when utilizing that land. Habitat restoration is there to try and address the area habitat that is present locally and can help drive what the final reclamation of the site would look like. And then, of course, as all general standards that apply, all other environmental regulations need to be complied with while meeting these standards. So then we jump into the other listed categories within the standard sections. There is a surface water and wetlands protection standard, and this is just mainly to focus in on the reclamation activities and how they are expected to be played out in the landscape so as not to adversely impact surface water quality standards or to adversely impact runoff impacting neighboring properties. Groundwater protections are similar in nature in that reclamation activities should not adversely impact the groundwater quantity or the groundwater quality. Topsoil management standards are there to help manage what is to be retained on the site. The standard does not require the topsoil to all remain on site. It does not prohibit the sale of that topsoil, but it does provide criteria to be met when keeping topsoil on the property. Final grading and slopes are there to help us address the stability for high wall that is expected to be remaining in place, address slope angles of materials that are going to be kept over for reclamation, and to address stability and safe conditions for any water bodies that are planned. Topsoil redistribution for reclamation also comes with a standard for its application and distribution for supporting revegetation. And then we can jump into looking at revegetation and site stabilization. A series of standards with regards to who does what and when. So it is the operator's responsibility to revegetate and stabilize the site. The RA is required to go in and field check that against the approved plan. Assessing completion of successful reclamation is a standard that is the responsibility of the regulatory authority. There's criteria in there that the RA is supposed to follow when determining that completion. The operator provides that criteria in the reclamation plan. Now, these two standards, the revegetation and site stabilization standard and the assessing completion of successful reclamation standard, points to the reclamation plan for its measures and provisions. Then the reclamation plan itself points back to the standards for satisfying that. Intermittent mining. So the reclamation standard for intermittent mining recognizes that there will be periods of no activity. Intermittent cessation in mining should at least address the measures that are going to be utilized on the site to keep the site stable during non-mining conditions. There's also the opportunity for the reclamation permit to apply conditions to assure that the site will be stable during these downtime periods. And also can address some of the other items that can be available towards intermittent waivers of financial assurance and fees when the intermittent mining standards is met. Finally, there is a provision or a standard being provided for the maintenance of that site for the period between when the operator says that they're done mining and reclamation has been completed and prior to the assessment of the completion of the site and release. So that if anything should crop up, the operator is required to maintain the site. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the plan itself. The reclamation plan contains all of the components that will satisfy the standards. In a nutshell, this plan serves both the operator and the regulatory authority throughout the authority's compliance and inspection manual. I'm hoping everybody's taking these with them out in the field when they go and inspect their sites, because it's going to show you what activities are to be in play, and you can check that up against that plan to see that they're following it. It also is important to tell you when done is done. You're going to be looking for various applications of slopes and revegetation and so on as you move through the mine site and as the operator moves through their phases. And you're going to be able to say, okay, that looks like it's all done over there, and you can have that conversation with the operator about what they need to do in order to reduce their financial commitment to the site and to show active reclamation on the site that will reduce their overall exposure and limits the amount of work that needs to be done at the end. Kind of speaks to that contemporaneous reclamation standard too. So it turns into the operators and the regulatory authorities' insurance policies. If the plan is complete and it's followed, you know, the protections are in place and has a very strong standing in a court of law should it ever be called into question. Very important. So moving along into the plan components. So our second webinar is going to go into some pretty big detail on many of these plan components, including the site information and the reclamation measures and criteria for successful reclamation. But I'm going to step through this component section from a broader standpoint of view, just so that you can have a clear idea of where things are fitting and why they're needed. So at the start, we'll take a look at site information. we need to have some information about that property before mining begins or before reopening a closed mine from prior operations. And that includes the lay of the land. So those maps are going to provide the general aerial extent of the operations, the parcel ownership, the general location of the parcel that is being proposed to be mined. The topsoil information about what's currently there, if there is topsoil substitute already present, that information will be helpful in understanding the pre-existing conditions. Biological resources also important. This tells us what is currently the habitat of the area, what type of animal and plant resources are available, surface waters and other resources that could be affected or impacted by the mining activities in its pre-existing conditions. Topographic maps, existing topography will give us an idea of how the landscape will change throughout the mining phases and in reclamation. Any existing man-made features such as houses, driveways, roads, electric lines, utility corridors, rail lines, anything that has been created by man, if it's present on the site, is important information to have at the start. And including with that is a plan set to show how that's laid out. And we'll have an example of that as we go. So another component of the reclamation plan is post-mining land use. So now this is important because the operator and the landowner, if they're different, are the ones that have the greatest say over what that is. Now, as a county owning the land and having like a highway department running a pit, that is a good conversation to have with the county in a partnership setting. But when it comes to private owned land use, it's really pretty much up to the landowner to decide how he wants to use his land after mining is done. That said, there's a couple of things to consider. If the county has planning or particular zoning in place at the time that non-metallic mining is expected to begin, and this is not taking into consideration any registration of mineral deposits, but if the zoning allows for it, then that post-mining land use needs to be consistent with that zoning. And then also taking into consideration farmland, land is in farmland preservation, then post-mining land use has to be agriculture in nature when mining is done. Okay, jumping into reclamation measures. So this is going to be one of the areas where in the second webinar, we're going to go into greater detail. As you can see, all of these items listed on the screen now, in addition to items on the next screen, are going to speak to how the reclamation measures are being played out on the site. So this is during mining activities as well as at the end. So this is kind of a play as you go kind of measure. So the reclamation plan needs to call out that earthwork activity. Where's overburden going to go? How is it going to be placed? What are the orientation of the materials going to be, the stockpiles, the excavations, things like that? Where is the material going to be removed from? So all of that earthwork, both in a map, a plan set, or a narrative combined, will help paint the picture of what that looks like. Topsoil and topsoil substitute management methods. Again, this speaks to the standard with regards to storage of that topsoil and how it's going to be managed while mining is actively going on. Then we're going to want to have some type of a topographic map showing out what the final contours of the property are going to be looking like. And then, you know, how are they going to achieve that final topography? Any structures that are proposed to remain on the site after mining is done should also be marked out. A reclamation cost estimate needs to be provided in the reclamation measures section. This is there to help gauge the idea of the degree of reclamation needed against what it's going to cost the county or the regulatory authority to have to do in the event that the operator is not able to carry out reclamation on the site. So that cost estimate comes in at the start of the plan as part of the reclamation measures. The regulatory authority needs to take that cost estimate and review what is actually being proposed and determine how that is going to be implemented by the county. And so down the road, as far as part of the permitting process, then there will be a revisit of the reclamation cost estimate when it comes to establishing the amount of financial assurance. But at a minimum, the operator needs to provide that cost estimate as part of the plan. Reclamation measures also need to include a revegetation plan and quantifiable standards for that revegetation. So while it is important to note that site conditions will dictate what and how needs to be done in order to achieve revegetation, it's clearly up to the operator to put that information into the plan. So as the regulatory authority is reviewing the plan, if the site conditions and all of the site information that is provided to you doesn't make sense based off of what's being proposed in the reclamation plan, then the regulatory authority needs to reconnect with the operator and say, how's that going to work? Can you please provide more information? All right, so I said there were some more reclamation measures. We're getting down to the end of the list there. So the reclamation measures need to include erosion control measures for those reclamation activities. So in the standards, there is requirements for revegetation and site stabilization. Erosion control measures are part of that and needs to speak to how the site is going to keep and retain that topsoil and keep and retain that revegetation seed base. Areas that are expected to be reclaimed on an interim basis should also be mentioned in the reclamation measures section of the plan. This is to help address that intermittent mining standard and also address the contemporaneous reclamation standard. And then finally, long-term safety needs to be addressed in the reclamation measures as well. If a high wall is expected to be remained in place, the operator needs to provide the measures that are going to speak to the long-term safety of the public when utilizing that land after mining is done. Things like benching and terracing, fencing, signage, berms that would prevent people from coming in close proximity of a high wall. All of those types of things can be utilized when addressing long-term safety. Okay, so moving along to other plan components. So the next section is the criteria for successful reclamation. So the operator must provide this information to the regulatory authority. The RA then verifies that criteria when evaluating the sites. So the operator will need to put those provisions in that plan that tells the RA when done is done. And the RA needs to be able to go out on that site with that information and assess whether or not they've achieved that criteria. So what that looks like is a conversation between the RA and the operator with regards to the site conditions and what that site calls for. We'll have an example of what that might look like in a little bit, but things like percent vegetation and various types of stability can be called for. So then finally, the certification. I would like to emphasize that it's important, and I almost can't emphasize it enough, for not only the operator to sign as a responsible party on the reclamation plan, but also to have that landowner signature as well. Especially if we've got two different owners, and we have everybody can concur on that plan together. But also, if that land goes for sale and the operator continues to mine that land with the new landowner, then that new landowner is also going to have to sign on and concur with the reclamation plan as well. Finally, let's not overlook the plan component of approval. So once the regulatory authority has worked through the entire review of the plan, that plan must have approval for that completion to be fully in place and to allow for the issuance of the permit. If any of those components are missing, the plan really shouldn't be or can't be approved because they haven't addressed everything that is needed on the site. So based on that, why don't we take a quick peek at what that might look like when we start digging into it. So here we see a plan set, or a plan drawing, if you will. This contains a number of components. So we have both pre-existing and proposed contours of the site in cross-sectional format. So if you were to stand on the ground and look straight out at what the site is like, the existing conditions is the topography that you see in the dotted dashed line at the top. And the proposed mine is looking at taking the elevation down to where you see the drawn blue areas with the gradations in there. So everything that's in between is proposed to be mined. Then the plan also calls for the placement of overburden as backfill as part of reclamation, and understanding the dynamics of the units and the distances that are played out. Kind of looks goofy, but if you know are able to read the plan set, you will know that the 3-to-1 slope that is being referenced has an exaggeration applied to it in order to fit everything all on one page. So it helps then also to have an overhead view of the site. So where you see the A to A prime and the line drawn between them, that is representing that plan view or cross section layout. So then you can begin to see, okay, this is the topography as it's being laid out. And now you can begin to see the extent of the mining operations east, west, north, south, in addition to the elevation points up, down. The second map also shows you the placement of stockpiled materials, as well as structures and roadways that exist in and around the area that's proposed to be mined. In this example of reclamation measures, you now have a pull out, if you will, of the final reclaimed contours. You can now begin to see where the placement of 3-to-1 slopes are, where they're going to have the disturbed mining area footprint be stabilized and finalized, as well as areas that are not going to be touched in the final plan. You can also see what the expected elevation points are going to be. And then they give you the reference of the A to A prime cross-section drawing to help you visualize from the first site what that final reclaimed area is going to look like. In addition to the maps and the plan sets, the narrative is also very important. With the narrative, you can begin to see what the timing of things are going to be like and what the activities are going to be entailed in order to achieve what is being presented in the plan set. So a description on the earthwork, the establishment of 3-to-1 slopes, the placement of topsoil on the berms and the seeding, the DOT seed mix references, and any other references to any other figures or plan drawings where you can find this information being applied. I thought it would be good to show the criteria for successful reclamation as a reference for you. And in this particular example, we see that the operator has indicated a 70% cover of vegetation by visual count, and that all slopes at 3-to-1 will have no active erosion on the site, and then their commitment to conducting the site inspections. So this is a start or an overview of how you can begin to see the components of a reclamation plan and how it interplays and fits together to meet those standards. At least I hope I've achieved that. I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask me questions. Don't everybody jump at once.
Any questions out there? She's ready for you. Otherwise, I guess you gave such a good presentation, Roberta, that you answered all their questions.
Oh, I have a feeling the next webinar is going to generate a few more questions.
So I don't know what else to say. I guess.
I do see it.
Did the question come through? Yes, I do have one. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So question coming in here, when a mine site is selling, does anyone have any good ways to make sure the new landowner signs prior to sale agreeing to the reclamation plan? Boy, that is a good question, because it happens probably more often than not that the land sells and nobody knows about it. So this can be one of the conditions that a non-metallic mining reclamation permit can put out there, that the regulatory authority be notified upon sale of the land. Another good thing to include with that condition also is if an operator is leasing the land, for the regulatory authority to be notified when a lease is up. That will give the county an opportunity to have an outreach effort to the landowner with regards to their concurrence on the reclamation plan and to address the leases.
Thanks, Roberta, and thanks, Tracy. And just looking to see if anyone else has any questions. Otherwise, I think we're going to say goodbye. Well, thanks so much, Roberta. That was great. I appreciate you taking the time to do that, and we look forward to the next one in the series.
Happy to oblige.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.